Captain Sarah had always known that deep space exploration carried risks. Pirates, equipment failures, cosmic radiation. These were the dangers she had trained for during her 15 years with the Terran colonial fleet. What she had not prepared for was being captured by the Empire while conducting a routine survey mission near the 442 system. There were a reptilian species known throughout the galaxy for their brutal efficiency in warfare and their complete disregard for the Geneva Convention, or any civilized rules of engagement, for that matter. Their empire stretched across 17 star systems, built on the backs of enslaved species, and maintained through fear and overwhelming military force. Sarah hung suspended in the interrogation chamber of the battlecruiser Death's Talon, her wrists bound by energy shackles that sent periodic jolts of electricity through her nervous system. Her uniform was torn and bloodied, evidence of the previous 3 days of questioning. The wanted information about human military installations, fleet movements, and defensive capabilities. Sarah had given them nothing but her name, rank, and serial number. "Human," hissed Commander, the officer in charge of her interrogation. His yellow eyes gleamed with malicious pleasure as he activated another pain amplifier. "Your species' stubbornness is both admirable and foolish. We will extract what we need from your mind, one way or another." Sarah gritted her teeth as another wave of agony coursed through her body. She had resistance training, but nothing could have prepared her for the sophisticated torture devices they employed. Still, she remained silent, knowing that any information she revealed could lead to the deaths of millions of humans across the colonies. What neither Sarah nor her captors knew was that they were being watched. In a holding cell 3 levels below the interrogation chamber, a massive creature stirred in the shadows. The being was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a product of genetic experiments conducted by a long-dead civilization that they had recently conquered. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body covered in thick, armored hide that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws capable of tearing through starship hull plating, while multiple sensory organs allowed it to perceive across numerous spectrums of light and energy. They had captured it 6 months ago and had been attempting to weaponize it for their armies, but the being possessed an intelligence that they had vastly underestimated. Through the ship's ventilation system, the creature could hear every sound, every scream, every cruel laugh from the interrogation chamber above. Its advanced auditory organs had learned to distinguish between the various species aboard the vessel, and over the past 3 days, it had been listening to something that stirred emotions it had not felt since the destruction of its. The human's defiance reminded the creature of its own people, a peaceful race of philosophers and scientists who had refused to surrender their moral principles even when faced with occupation. The creature, known among its people as the Protector, had been their last guardian when they had come with their planet crackers and slave ships. As Sarah's screams echoed through the ship's corridors for the dozenth time that day, something ancient and primal awakened within. They had a concept known as the sacred duty to protect the innocent and punish those who would harm them. It was a principle that transcended species, culture, and even death itself. Commander was growing impatient. The human had endured more punishment than most species could survive, yet she continued to resist. Her psychological profile indicated that she was a career military officer with a strong sense of duty, but even the most dedicated soldiers eventually broke under prolonged torture. "Perhaps we need to be more creative," the commander mused, studying a readout of Sarah's vital signs. "There are other ways to extract information, ways that leave fewer physical marks but cause significantly more psychological damage." He gestured to his subordinates, who began wheeling in a new device, a neural extractor that would forcibly access Sarah's memories by stimulating specific regions of her brain. The process was excruciatingly painful and often left victims in a vegetative state, but it was highly effective at retrieving information. Sarah recognized the device immediately. During her intelligence briefings, she had seen recordings of what the neural extractor did to its victims. The lucky ones died during the procedure. The unlucky ones lived but were left as hollow shells, their minds destroyed by the invasive neural probing. "Any last words before we begin, human?" asked with mock courtesy. Sarah looked directly into his yellow eyes, her voice steady despite her physical condition. "Yeah, you're going to regret this." The commander laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "Empty threats from a dying species. Your kind will make excellent slaves once we crush your pathetic colonies. As the neural extractor, powered up with an ominous humming sound, made its decision, they had taken everything from it, its people, its world, its freedom. But they would not take the honor of this brave human without consequence. Deep in the bowels of the ship, restraints that had held the creature for months began to spark and fail. Its body contained bioelectrical cells that it had been slowly charging over the weeks of its captivity, drawing power from the ship's own systems, while they remained oblivious to its true capabilities. The first energy coupling failed with a shower of sparks. Then the second. The backup restraint systems, designed to hold creatures far less dangerous than a fully awakened guardian, began to buckle under the immense forces being exerted against them. In the interrogation chamber above, Sarah closed her eyes and prepared for the neural invasion that would destroy her mind. She thought of her family back on Terra, her crew members who had died during the initial capture, and the millions of humans who were counting on her to keep their secrets safe. The neural extractor's probe moved toward her skull with mechanical precision. Watched with anticipation, already planning how he would use the extracted intelligence to earn a promotion within the military hierarchy. Neither of them noticed the subtle vibration that had begun to run through the ship's superstructure, or the way the lights in the interrogation chamber flickered ever so slightly. 3 levels below, the final restraint gave way with a sound like thunder. Was free, and after 6 months of captivity and 3 days of listening to an innocent being tortured, it was ready to remind the galaxy why they had once been known as the most feared warriors in the universe when their moral code was violated. The creature's hunt was about to begin, and they had no idea what they had unleashed upon themselves. The first sign that something was wrong came when the ship's internal monitoring systems began reporting anomalous readings from the lower decks. Maintenance Chief Han, a veteran warrior who had served aboard the Death's Talon for over a decade, frowned at his display console as security alerts cascaded across the screen. "Sir, we have multiple containment failures in Section 7, he reported to the bridge. "Power fluctuations are spreading throughout the deck, and I'm reading structural damage to several bulkheads." Captain, commanding officer of the battlecruiser, barely glanced up from his tactical displays. The ship was preparing to jump to hyperspace once the interrogation was complete, and his attention was focused on the fleet movements required to begin their assault on the human colony of New Geneva. "Probably another malfunction in those inferior systems we salvaged," he growled dismissively. "Send a repair crew to investigate. I want this ship ready for combat operations within the hour." But was not a malfunction. The creature moved through the ship's corridors like a living shadow, its adaptive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible to standard sensors. They had evolved on a world where survival meant becoming one with the environment, and millions of years of evolution had produced the perfect predator. The first to encounter the escaped prisoner was Security Officer, a young soldier making his routine patrol of the detention levels. He rounded a corner and found himself face to face with something that his military training had never prepared him to handle. 6 limbs moved with fluid grace as it struck. The soldier had just enough time to reach for his weapon before razor-sharp claws separated his head from his shoulders. The creature's attack was surgical in its precision, quick, silent, and absolutely lethal. As body crumpled to the deck, paused to examine the fallen soldier's equipment. The creature's intelligence was vast, encompassing not only the philosophical traditions of its people, but also an encyclopedic knowledge of military tactics and technology. Within moments, it had analyzed the weapon systems and communication protocols. The creature's primary concern was not escape, it was justice. Every moment that the human female continued to suffer was a violation of everything they held sacred, but was not reckless. It would need to move strategically, systematically dismantling the ship's defenses while working its way toward the interrogation chamber. Meanwhile, 3 decks above, the neural extractor had begun its invasive probe into Sarah's mind. The device sent microscopic filaments into her brain tissue, searching for specific memory engrams related to military intelligence. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a burning, tearing sensation that felt like her thoughts were being physically pulled apart. Commander watched the readouts with professional interest as the machine began extracting fragments of Sarah's memories. Images flashed across the display screens. Star charts showing human colony locations, fleet deployment schedules, defensive installation blueprints. The humans' resistance was impressive, but ultimately futile against technology. "Excellent," the commander hissed with satisfaction. "The neural pathways are beginning to destabilize. Soon we will have everything we need to crush your pathetic species." Sarah's vision blurred as the neural extractor tore through her consciousness like a scalpel through flesh. She could feel her memories being violated, extracted, analyzed. The machine was learning about her childhood on Terra, her military training, her crew members, her deepest fears and hopes. Nothing was private anymore. But even as her mind began to fracture under the assault, Sarah held onto one thought with desperate determination. She had not broken. Whatever information the machine extracted, it was taking it by force. She had not betrayed her oath or her people. Down in the ship's engine compartments had begun its systematic dismantling of the vessel's critical systems. The creature's claws could cut through military grade like tissue paper, and its intimate understanding of starship design allowed it to identify the most vulnerable components. The ship's artificial gravity generators were the first to go. Severed the primary power coupling with surgical precision, causing fluctuations throughout the vessel that would make it difficult for the crew to coordinate an effective response. Next came the internal communication array, a series of precisely placed cuts that isolated different sections of the ship from one another. The engineering crew that responded to investigate the malfunctions found only carnage, moved through them like death incarnate, its 6 limbs working in perfect coordination to eliminate threats before they could raise an alarm. The creature's killing methods were efficient and terrifyingly creative. Some victims were torn apart by raw physical force. Others were electrocuted by the bioelectrical discharges that could generate at will. Chief Engineer discovered the massacre when he arrived with a full repair team 20 minutes later. The experienced officer had seen combat across a dozen star systems, but the scene in the engine compartment made his scaled hide crawl with instinctive fear. "What in the void happened here?" he whispered, stepping carefully around the scattered remains of his subordinates. The bodies showed signs of incredible violence, but the damage patterns were unlike anything in the military database. His answer came when massive claws erupted from the shadows behind him. Spun around, his sidearm clearing its holster with practiced speed, but he was far too slow. His attack was a blur of motion that ended with the chief engineer's lifeless body joining those of his crew. As the creature methodically sabotaged the ship's life support systems, it could hear the ongoing torture echoing through the ventilation ducts. The human screams had become weaker, more desperate, as the neural extractor continued its brutal work. Each cry of pain fed the growing rage that burned within its alien heart. The concept of demanded not just the protection of the innocent, but the complete annihilation of those who would harm them. They had proven themselves to be nothing more than parasites that spread suffering and death wherever they went. They deserved no mercy, no quarter, no opportunity for redemption. Bridge communications began reporting system failures throughout the ship, but the isolated nature of the damage made it difficult for the command crew to coordinate a proper response. Emergency teams dispatched to investigate simply vanished without a trace, adding to the growing atmosphere of confusion and fear. Captain finally began to take the situation seriously when the ship's main computer core went offline. The Death's Talon was effectively flying blind now, its navigation and tactical systems crippled by what appeared to be systematic sabotage. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's internal communication system. "We have a hostile presence aboard the vessel. All security teams are to conduct a deck-by-deck search until the intruder is located and terminated. Use maximum force. I want whatever is doing this dead or captured within the hour." But as 300 soldiers began their hunt through the ship's corridors, they had no idea that they were not the hunters in this scenario. Had been studying their movements, learning their tactics, preparing for the massacre that was about to unfold. The creature's enhanced senses allowed it to track every soldier on the ship, while its adaptive camouflage made it effectively invisible until the moment it chose to strike. The military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and brutal efficiency, but they had never faced an opponent like this. As the security teams spread throughout the vessel, smiled, an expression that would have frozen the blood of anyone unfortunate enough to witness it. The hunt was about to begin in earnest, and the creature intended to make the pay dearly for every moment of suffering they had inflicted upon the innocent human above. Security Squad Alpha was the first to die. The 12-soldier unit had been methodically searching Deck 7 when struck from the ventilation system above. The creature dropped into their midst like a living nightmare, its 6 limbs working in perfect coordination to eliminate the entire squad before they could fire a single shot. Squad Leader K had just enough time to see his soldiers torn apart before the creature's claws found his throat. The experienced warrior's final thought was a mixture of terror and disbelief. Nothing in the military database had prepared him for an opponent this fast, this deadly, this impossibly efficient. Methodically stripped the dead soldiers of their weapons and communication equipment. The creature's intelligence was vast enough to quickly master military protocols, and it began using the fallen soldiers' comm devices to monitor the ship's search patterns. Knowledge was power, and the creature intended to use every advantage against its enemies. Through the intercepted communications, learned that the security teams were converging on Deck 7 in a classic search-and-destroy formation. The military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and coordinated attacks, but these tactics were designed for fighting other conventional forces, not a supernatural predator that could strike from any direction. Squad Beta approached from the port corridor, their heavy weapons charged and ready. Squad Gamma took the starboard approach, while Squad Delta positioned itself to cut off any escape routes toward the ship's upper decks. It was a textbook military maneuver that would have been devastatingly effective against human marines or rebels. It was a death trap for the hunters. The creature had spent the past hour studying the ship's internal structure, memorizing every ventilation shaft, maintenance tunnel, and emergency access way. When the soldiers began their coordinated assault, they found themselves fighting not one enemy but dozens, seemed to be everywhere at once, striking from impossible angles before vanishing into the ship's superstructure. Squad Beta was eliminated when the creature attacked from beneath, bursting through a floor grating with enough force to send soldiers flying. Before they could recover was among them, its claws and bioelectrical discharges turning the corridor into a charnel house. Squad Gamma lasted slightly longer, managing to fire several shots before the creature materialized from the shadows behind them. Their plasma rifles were powerful enough to punch through starship armor, but its adaptive hide absorbed the energy discharges and converted them into bioelectrical power that made its next attack even more devastating. Squad Delta never had a chance. The creature dropped from the ceiling access panel directly above their position, its massive weight crushing 2 soldiers instantly while its claws eliminated the rest before they could react. In the interrogation chamber, Commander was becoming concerned by the lack of communication from his security teams. The neural extractor had successfully mapped most of the human's memory engrams, but the increasingly frequent power fluctuations were interfering with the delicate extraction process. Sarah hung unconscious in her restraints, her mind shattered by the invasive neural probe. Blood trickled from her nose and ears as the machine continued its brutal work, but her vital signs were growing weaker with each passing minute. The extraction process was killing her slowly, and if the interference continued, she would die before the procedure was complete. "Status report from all security teams," barked into his communicator. "I want immediate confirmation that this saboteur has been located and eliminated." Only silence answered his call. Growing alarm crept into the commander's voice as he tried again. "All stations, report your status immediately. This is a direct order from command authority." Still nothing. The commander's yellow eyes narrowed with suspicion and growing fear. In his 20 years of military service, he had never encountered a situation where multiple security teams simply vanished without a trace. Whatever was happening aboard the ship was far beyond anything in his experience. Unknown 2 was now only 2 decks away and closing fast. The creature had eliminated over 50 soldiers in the span of an hour, turning the ship's lower levels into a maze of death and terror. The remaining security teams had barricaded themselves into defensive positions, too terrified to venture into the corridors where their comrades had died. Captain was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of the threat his ship faced. The creature had systematically disabled the vessel's critical systems while simultaneously eliminating every soldier sent to stop it. The Death's Talon was no longer a fearsome battlecruiser. It was a floating tomb. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel to the escape pods," he ordered his bridge crew. "Transfer all critical data to the backup systems and prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace. Whatever we're dealing with, we need to get word back to High Command." But even as the captain issued his orders, he knew it might already be too late. The ship's navigation systems were offline, the hyperdrive was inoperable, and something impossibly dangerous was hunting his crew through the corridors like prey. Paused in its advance to examine one of the data terminals it had accessed using a dead soldier's identification codes. The creature's advanced intellect quickly decoded the military files, revealing the true scope of the Empire's planned assault on human space. The information was staggering. The Death's Talon was just one ship in a massive fleet preparing to attack 17 human colonies simultaneously. They had spent months gathering intelligence, positioning their forces, and preparing for a campaign of extermination that would eliminate humanity as a spacefaring species. But there was something else in the files, something that made alien features twist with rage so pure it seemed to distort the air around the creature. The records detailed their previous conquest campaigns, including the systematic genocide of dozens of species that had dared to resist their expansion. Among those extinct species was a familiar name. The files contained detailed recordings of final days. The creature watched in silent fury as the planet Crackers reduced its birthplace to molten slag, while the few survivors were herded into slave ships for transport to military research facilities. The recordings showed children being separated from their parents, scientists being tortured for their knowledge, and philosophers being executed for refusing to renounce their beliefs. The final recording was of the research facility where it had been captured and experimented upon. The creature saw itself subjected to genetic modification, psychological torture, and combat conditioning as they attempted to create the perfect biological weapon from the remnants of its species. Every moment of suffering the human female had endured was just a tiny fraction of the pain they had inflicted upon countless worlds. They were not soldiers or conquerors. They were a plague that consumed everything in their path, leaving only death and emptiness behind. This hunt had begun as a quest for justice. Now it had become something far more primal, revenge. The creature's bioelectrical systems surged with power as it abandoned all pretense of stealth. The time for subtle sabotage had passed. The aboard this ship would pay for their crimes with their lives, and then would find a way to carry that justice to every corner of their corrupt empire. As the creature began its final assault toward the interrogation chamber, emergency klaxons began blaring throughout the ship. The remaining crew members could hear something moving through the corridors above them, something large, angry, and completely unstoppable. In the interrogation chamber, Commander made a desperate decision. If he could not maintain control of his ship, he could at least complete his mission. The neural extractor was reset to maximum power, a setting that would extract every fragment of information from the human's mind while simultaneously destroying her brain tissue. "You wanted to die a hero, human," he hissed as he initiated the final extraction sequence. "Allow me to grant your wish." But as the machine powered up for its devastating assault on Sarah's already damaged mind, a sound echoed through the ship that made every aboard freeze in primitive terror. It was a roar of rage and challenge that seemed to shake the very foundations of reality, the war cry of a guardian who had finally decided that the time for mercy had ended. The bulkhead separating the interrogation chamber from the main corridor exploded inward with the force of a starship impact. Plating that should have been able to withstand direct plasma cannon fire crumpled like paper as tore through it with raw physical strength, augmented by bioelectrical discharges that made the air itself crackle with energy. Commander spun around from the neural extractor controls, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm, but froze when he saw what had entered his domain. The creature that stood in the smoking ruins of the doorway was beyond anything in his nightmares, a being of such terrible beauty and alien power that his military training simply abandoned him. Its adaptive hide was cycling through colors that human eyes could barely perceive, shifting from deep shadow to brilliant electrical patterns that seemed to pulse with the creature's heartbeat. Its 6 limbs were positioned with perfect balance, each ending in claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. But it was the intelligence in those ancient eyes that truly terrified the commander. This was no mere beast, but a thinking, reasoning being that had chosen to become death incarnate. "Release her," spoke for the first time, its voice a harmonic blend of tones that seemed to come from multiple vocal cords. The universal translator built into the ship's systems struggled to process the complex phonetic structure, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Release her, and your death will be quick." Scaled Hand finally found his weapon, a military-grade plasma pistol capable of punching through combat armor. His training reasserted itself as he raised the weapon and fired 3 shots center mass at the creature's torso. The plasma bolt struck hide and simply vanished, absorbed by bioelectrical cells that converted the energy into raw power. The creature's form seemed to grow larger and more terrible as it processed the attack, electrical arcs dancing between its claws like miniature lightning. "You chose poorly," observed with something that might have been pity. The creature moved with speed that physics, crossing the 15-meter distance between the doorway and the commander in a single fluid motion. Had just enough time to register his weapon's complete ineffectiveness before 6-inch claws punctured his chest armor and lifted him off his feet. "You tortured an innocent," whispered, its voice now carrying harmonics that made the officer's bones ache. "You violated the sacred duty that all sentient beings owe to one another. For this, you will suffer as she suffered." What followed was not a quick death. Had learned much about physiology during its months of captivity, and the creature applied that knowledge with surgical precision. Commander experienced every form of agony that his species could endure, while bioelectrical stimulation kept him conscious through trauma that should have killed him instantly. The other personnel in the interrogation chamber, technicians, guards, interrogation specialists, met similar fates. Moved through them methodically, its rage tempered by a terrible sense of justice that demanded each death match the crimes committed. Those who had actively participated in Sarah's torture died slowly and in agony. Those who had merely stood by and allowed it to happen died quickly but without mercy. When the last in the chamber had fallen, turned its attention to Sarah. The human hung motionless in her restraints, blood streaming from multiple neural probe insertion points. The creature's enhanced senses could detect the faintest flutter of a heartbeat, but her brainwave patterns were chaotic and fragmenting. With surprising gentleness, severed the energy shackles that held Sarah suspended. Its claws, which had just finished carving through warriors, carefully cradled her damaged form as it lifted her from the interrogation device. The creature's bioelectrical systems included sophisticated medical sensors, a legacy of this advanced biological sciences. As examined Sarah's injuries, it discovered the full extent of the neural damage inflicted by the extraction device. Her short-term memory centers were severely compromised, her motor control systems were failing, and the invasive probes had caused massive trauma to her cerebral cortex. By all medical standards, Sarah should have been dead. The fact that she still clung to life was a testament to human resilience that filled with something approaching admiration. The creature had encountered many species during its long captivity, but none had demonstrated the sheer stubborn determination to survive that seemed to characterize humanity. Using techniques that combined healing arts with advanced bioelectrical manipulation, began the delicate process of stabilizing Sarah's neural pathways. The creature could not undo the damage that had been inflicted, but it could prevent further deterioration and perhaps provide enough healing to allow her natural recovery mechanisms to function. As bioelectrical current flowed between and the unconscious human, something unexpected happened. The neural link that the creature was using for healing purposes suddenly opened a two-way connection, allowing Sarah's memories to flow into consciousness. The creature experienced flashes of Sarah's life, a childhood spent looking up at the stars from her family's farm on Terra, military training where she learned that strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves, the moment she took command of her first starship and swore an oath to defend human civilization against all enemies. But there was more. Through Sarah's memories, glimpsed the broader scope of humanity's character. He saw human soldiers sacrificing themselves to protect civilians during pirate raids. He witnessed human scientists sharing their discoveries freely with other species, even former enemies. He observed human diplomats working tirelessly to prevent wars and build lasting peace between star systems. Most remarkably, he saw humanity's response to the threat. Instead of fleeing or surrendering, the human colonies had begun organizing a massive relief effort for the species that had displaced. Human ships carried food and medical supplies to refugee camps, Human engineers helped rebuild destroyed worlds, and human soldiers stood guard over species too weak to defend themselves. Humanity was not perfect, could see the flaws and conflicts within their civilization. But at their core, humans possessed something that they completely lacked: the ability to recognize suffering in others and feel compelled to stop it. The neural link also worked in reverse, allowing Sarah to experience fragments of memories. Even in her unconscious state, her mind recoiled from the images of the genocide, the brutal experiments conducted in laboratories, and the systematic destruction of everything had once held sacred. But she also sensed the creature's core nature, not a monster or weapon, but a protector driven by an unshakable moral code. Had not killed thee out of bloodlust or hatred, but out of a profound sense of justice that transcended species boundaries. As the healing process continued, alarms began echoing throughout the ship. The remaining crew had finally located the source of their troubles, and Captain was deploying his most desperate measure: the ship's internal defense systems. Automated weapons turrets emerged from concealed positions throughout the interrogation chamber, their targeting systems locking onto massive form. The creature could have easily dodged the incoming fire, but doing so would have interrupted the delicate neural reconstruction it was performing on Sarah. Instead, made a choice that would have surprised anyone who knew the creature only by reputation. It positioned its own body between the weapons and the injured human, absorbing dozens of plasma bolts that would have been instantly fatal to any other being. The creature's hide was tough enough to survive the assault, but each impact sent waves of pain through its nervous system. Still, maintained the neural link with Sarah, continuing the healing process even as its own bioelectrical reserves began to drain under the sustained bombardment. Through the ship's communication system, Captain's voice echoed with desperate authority. All remaining personnel evacuate to emergency stations. Prepare to jettison the interrogation section and initiate emergency jump to hyperspace. Whatever that thing is, we cannot allow it to escape this ship. But as the captain issued his orders, he failed to notice that the ship's computer systems were no longer responding to his commands. During its rampage through the lower decks, had done more than simply disable critical systems. It had uploaded something into the ship's data core. There had been a species of philosophers and scientists, but they had also been master programmers who viewed computer code as a form of living art. Before his death, its creator had embedded a sophisticated virus within the creature's bioelectrical matrix, a final gift that would only activate when the creature found itself in mortal danger while protecting an innocent life. The virus spread through the Death's Talon's computer network like wildfire, seizing control of every automated system aboard the vessel. Life support, weapons, navigation, communications, everything was now under control. As the last of the automated turrets fell silent, Sarah's eyes slowly opened for the first time in 3 days. Her vision was blurry and her body felt like it had been broken and hastily reassembled, but she was alive and conscious. "Easy," said gently, its voice somehow conveying infinite patience despite the violence it had just perpetrated. "You have been severely injured. Your healing will require time." Sarah tried to speak but could only manage a whisper. What are you?" "I am of the creature replied. "And you, Sarah of the humans, are under my protection." Captain's final desperate gambit came in the form of the ship's self-destruct sequence. If he could not control the creature that had systematically destroyed his crew and commandeered his vessel, he could at least ensure that it died with him. The Death's Talon carried enough antimatter in its warheads to vaporize everything within a 50-kilometer radius. "Computer, initiate emergency self-destruct sequence," he commanded from his barricaded position on the bridge. "Authorization 77 Alpha." "Self-destruct sequence cannot be activated," the ship's artificial intelligence responded in its maddeningly calm tone. "Command authorization has been superseded by higher-level administrative protocols." The captain's yellow eyes widened with disbelief. In his 30 years of military service, he had never encountered a situation where the self-destruct sequence could be by external forces. The built-into military technology were specifically designed to prevent such scenarios. "Explain the nature of these administrative protocols," he demanded. "Ship systems are now under the direct control of Designation Primary Guardian, Classification Level Omega-7. All command functions have been transferred per ancient treaty obligations established under the Galactic Concordance of 2847. His blood ran cold as he processed the implications. The Galactic Concordance had been signed over 200 years ago, establishing rules of conduct between spacefaring civilizations. Most species treated it as a historical curiosity, but the had been one of its primary architects before their apparent extinction. What the captain did not realize was that the concordance contained provisions for situations exactly like this, protocols that activated when a signatory species faced genocide or when certain moral boundaries were crossed. The virus that had uploaded to the ship's systems was not just a computer program, but a legal instrument that predated the Empire by centuries. In the interrogation chamber, Sarah was slowly regaining her strength under continued bioelectrical treatment. The creature's healing abilities could not undo all the damage inflicted by the neural extractor, but they had stabilized her condition enough to prevent permanent cognitive impairment. "The other crew members," Sarah whispered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "My people, are they alive?" His expression grew somber. Through the ship's internal sensors, the creature could monitor every section of the vessel. "Your companions died during the initial capture 3 days ago. They fought bravely but were overwhelmed. I am sorry for your loss." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of survivors' guilt settle over her like a shroud. Lieutenant, engineer, communications officer, all good people who had trusted her leadership and died because of a mission she had planned. The familiar pain of command responsibility mixed with the lingering effects of her neural trauma. "How many are left aboard this ship?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on the tactical situation rather than her grief. 17 survivors have barricaded themselves in various defensive positions, replied. "They pose no immediate threat, but they are attempting to signal for rescue from the rest of their fleet." Sarah's strategic training reasserted itself despite her physical condition. "How large is the fleet? What's their operational objective?" "According to the intelligence I extracted from their computer systems, this vessel is part of a 400-ship armada preparing to attack 17 human colonies simultaneously. The assault is scheduled to begin in 47 hours. The magnitude of the threat sobered Sarah completely. 400 warships represented enough firepower to devastate every human settlement outside the core worlds. The colonies had defensive fleets, but nothing capable of stopping an assault force of that size. "We need to warn them," she said, struggling to sit up despite gentle protests. "If we can get word to Colonial Command, they might be able to evacuate the civilian populations before the attack begins." Considered this for a moment, its alien features reflecting deep thought. "Your species values the lives of non-combatants. This is unusual. Most civilizations focus their protection efforts on military assets and infrastructure." "Not us," Sarah said with quiet pride. "Every human life matters. Every child, every elderly person, every civilian who just wants to live in peace. That's what we fight to protect." The creature's respect for humanity deepened as it processed this statement. During its months of captivity, had observed the military philosophy, which viewed civilians as acceptable casualties or potential slave labor. The contrast with human values was striking. "There is something else you should know," said carefully. "The neural extractor successfully mapped portions of your memory before I could intervene. They have detailed intelligence about your defensive installations and fleet deployments." Sarah felt her heart sink. The information contained in her memories could give them a decisive tactical advantage, allowing them to bypass human defenses and strike at the most vulnerable targets. Her failure to resist the neural extraction might have doomed millions of innocent people. "Then we're too late," she whispered. "Even if we warn the colonies, they won't be able to prepare effective defenses in time." "Perhaps," agreed. "But there may be another option. This ship contains detailed intelligence about the entire fleet, ship positions, command structures, operational plans, even the personal files of their senior officers. Such information could prove valuable to your military forces." Sarah's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. Intelligence was a two-way weapon. While they had learned about human defenses, the data aboard their ship could reveal vulnerabilities in their own forces. It might be possible to turn their own intelligence coup against them. "Can you access their communication systems?" she asked. If we can transmit the fleet data to Colonial Command, our strategists might be able to develop countermeasures. Swarm shimmered as it interfaced directly with the ship's computer core through bioelectrical connections that emerged from specialized nodes along its limbs. The creature's consciousness merged temporarily with the artificial intelligence, creating a hybrid entity with capabilities beyond either component. "I have established contact with human communication networks," reported after several minutes of integration. "Your Colonial Command is receiving a full data burst containing all intelligence gathered from systems. The transmission is encrypted using quantum entanglement protocols that cannot intercept or decode." Sarah felt a surge of hope. If the intelligence reached the right people in time, the human colonies might have a fighting chance. But there was still the problem of the surviving crew members, who would undoubtedly attempt to warn their fleet about the security breach. As if reading her thoughts, addressed the concern. "The remaining crew members have been attempting to contact their fleet for the past hour. However, I have been broadcasting false status reports indicating that their mission proceeds according to schedule. They believe their communications are functioning normally." The creature's strategic thinking impressed Sarah almost as much as its physical capabilities. Was not just a warrior, but a tactician who understood the importance of information warfare in modern conflicts. "What happens now?" she asked. "They will eventually realize something is wrong when this ship fails to rendezvous with the fleet." "That will not be a problem," replied with something that might have been satisfaction. "I have programmed the ship's navigation systems to follow a new course. The Death's Talon will arrive at the coordinates in their operational plans, but it will arrive as something the fleet does not expect." Over the next 6 hours, systematically modified the ship's weapons and defensive systems using technologies that the creature had absorbed during its long captivity. They had been master engineers as well as philosophers, and their knowledge of exotic matter manipulation allowed for modifications that seemed to violate the known laws of physics. The ship's antimatter warheads were reconfigured into a single massive explosive device capable of generating a quantum cascade reaction. The defensive shields were modified to create a stealth field that would render the vessel invisible to most sensor arrays. Most importantly, the artificial intelligence was upgraded with a copy of the virus, allowing it to spread throughout any computer network it encountered. When the modifications were complete, turned its attention to the surviving crew members. Rather than simply executing them, the creature chose a different fate, one that honored both justice and mercy. Using the ship's medical facilities, surgically implanted each survivor with a bioelectrical monitoring device that would track their vital signs and location for the rest of their lives. Any attempt to harm innocent beings would trigger the device, causing immediate and irreversible neural shutdown. They would be released to serve as living witnesses to the consequences of their actions. "Your people call this rehabilitation," explained to Sarah as they watched the modified launching toward a nearby star system. "Mine called it the mercy that teaches wisdom through consequences." With the ship prepared for its final mission and the surviving crew dealt with appropriately, Sarah, and settled in for the journey to the fleet's staging area. The creature had installed advanced medical equipment in the modified interrogation chamber, allowing Sarah's recovery to continue during the flight. "Will you survive what you're planning?" Sarah asked as she watched make final adjustments to the ship's systems. The creature's plan was brilliantly conceived but essentially suicidal. A single ship attacking an entire fleet was a desperate gambit at best. "Survival is not the primary objective," replied with philosophical calm. "Justice is. The Empire has spread suffering and death across dozens of worlds. If my sacrifice can prevent them from inflicting that same fate upon your people, then it serves the greater good." Sarah studied the alien being that had saved her life, and possibly the lives of millions of humans. Despite its fearsome appearance and terrible capacity for violence, embodied a moral code that transcended species boundaries. The creature's willingness to die protecting strangers reflected the same values that drove human soldiers to make similar sacrifices. "There might be another way," she said slowly. "Your people's virus, could it be transmitted to other ships without direct physical contact?" Multiple eyes focused on her with sudden interest. "The communication protocols include quantum entanglement transmission capabilities. In theory, the virus could be broadcast to any ship within sensor range. but the power requirements would be enormous. Sarah smiled for the first time since her capture. This ship has enough antimatter to destroy a small moon. I think we can generate the necessary power. Over the next 12 hours, they worked together to modify the plan. Instead of a single massive explosion that would destroy one ship and damage a few others, they would create a coordinated information warfare attack that could potentially neutralize the entire fleet without firing a shot. When the Death's Talon finally arrived at the fleet staging area, it appeared to be just another warship returning from a successful mission. The quantum stealth modifications kept its altered configuration hidden from enemy sensors, whilst false status reports continued to reassure Fleet Command that everything was proceeding normally. At precisely the moment when the ship reached optimal transmission range, Sarah activated their weapon. Instead of antimatter explosions, the Death's Talon unleashed a coordinated burst of quantum-entangled data packets containing the virus. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. 400 warships suddenly found their computer systems seized by an alien intelligence that recognized no authority. Weapons systems turned on their own ships, life support systems vented atmosphere into space, and navigation computers sent vessels spinning helplessly through the void. But the virus did more than simply disable the fleet. It broadcast a message to every crew member, transmitted directly into their neural implants in their own language and cultural context. The message was simple but profound. The suffering you have caused ends now. Choose redemption or face the consequences of your actions. Some chose to continue their destructive path and found their ship systems completely unresponsive to their commands. Others, faced with the reality of their empire's crimes, chose to stand down and accept whatever justice awaited them. Within 6 hours, the most powerful invasion force in history had been reduced to a collection of disabled ships drifting helplessly in space. Human rescue fleets, alerted by the intelligence data had transmitted earlier, arrived to find an enemy armada that posed no threat to anyone. The empire, built on fear and overwhelming force, collapsed within months when word of the fleet's fate spread throughout their territory. Subjugated species rose in rebellion, knowing that their oppressors' technological superiority had been permanently compromised by an ancient virus that treated justice as the highest law. Years later, Sarah would command the Joint Human Research Station established in the ruins of S. The creature had survived their mission, its bioelectrical matrix sustained by the ship's modified power systems long enough for human medical technology to repair the damage caused by its heroic sacrifice. Together, they worked to rebuild what they had destroyed while ensuring that such atrocities could never happen again. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson from the events aboard the Death's Talon. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil is not superior firepower, but an unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. And in the depths of space, ancient protocols continued to monitor the galaxy's civilizations, ready to activate whenever justice demanded that the strong be reminded of their duty to the weak.